Hello everybody and welcome to the Great Guild Wars 2 countdown. For today there are only 5 or 2 days remaining until the launch of Guild Wars 2. 2 days till Guild Wars 2. What can I say really? It's just very, very close, isn't it? The footage in the background is from the Deathblow X. You can find a link to his channel in the description down below. News, there I've really got 3 different things really for you. First of all, last night, so I'm laying there in bed and I can't sleep. I don't know why. I've been laying there from about 2 AM till about 4 and I've been completely restless the entire time. In the end I give up and I'm like, right, I'll just go back on the computer, I'll watch something and then go back to bed. I log on and just in time for Runic really to announce 10 minutes in advance that another stress test was coming out. They keep proving me wrong. I keep saying there's not going to be many more stress tests and then they pull that out of the bag. There was another stress test, can you believe it? Last night it only lasted for 1 hour, so if you missed it, don't feel too bad. They only announced it 10 minutes before it was happening. It seemed like a very last minute, oh god, this is an emergency, we want to do this thing, because they'd actually already wiped our character from previous stress tests, so I don't think it was originally on the agenda. If you did play on this stress test, you were back down to level 1, you had no characters. The only thing that was saved were people that were on your contact lists. Everything else was removed, and I believe this is also the same situation that will be happening at launch. So anyone that created a character in that stress test, once again, it will be wiped. The only thing you'll find that's left over from stress tests is the fact that your contact lists are very much the same as they were before the game launched. So that's quite cool. Everything else, though, was reset. But interestingly, there were some differences. Actually, someone messaged me, and I'm hesitant to believe this, but apparently Ebenhawk was actually available in the stress test. That portal that took you there was available, and someone got a load of screenshots. Now, I do know that the press had access to Ebenhawk, so these screenshots could have come from there. But so I hear it was available there in this stress test. You couldn't really do much outside of Ebenhawk, obviously, in the explorable area, because everyone was like level 1 or as fast as you could possibly get to in that 1 hour. But yeah, quite cool, apparently. You could go over there to Ebenhawk. Also, as another bit of news that relates to the stress test as well in a similar way to this Ebenhawk thing, ArenaNet announced on their official website how we were going to be getting our Hall of Monuments rewards at last. We'd had little interviews and stuff that talked about their plans, and you know, it was all kind of tentative stuff, but they have 100% announced how it will be working. Basically, what will happen is when you get in game, if you are linked to a Guild Wars 1 account, you will have an item in your inventory, which is a portal item that you can double click, and it will actually teleport you to the Eye of the North out there in the world. It's quite cool. It will take you really, really far off to the north to the Hall of Monuments, which is awesome. It's there. It's built in Guild Wars 2. There you can find a character, Kim's the historian, who was there in Guild Wars 1, but he's now a ghost, which is very cool. Or Kimmy's, I don't know exactly how you're supposed to pronounce it, but he's there, and from him you can get any of the items you are entitled to. You can get these more than once, and you can get them as many times as you possibly want on any of your characters, so you don't have to worry about these being a one-time only thing. As for the levels and stuff that they come at, I'm assuming they are just have like a base level that you'll get them at, and either that will scale as your character that's collecting the reward levels up, or we will have to rely on transmutation to change the looks of these things. So that's kind of how it's working. I think it's quite cool. I'm shocked that they built the Eye of the North and the Hall of Monuments actually in Guild Wars 2, being so far to the north. I really am. It's quite cool that we do actually get to go there. Once you're done and you've collected your rewards, you can once again double click the portal item and return to where you originally came from. Bish bash bosh, sorted out. So that's quite cool. And going back to the stress test, someone actually in the stress test, I don't know how widespread this was, but someone messaged me, they actually had this portal item in their inventory during the stress test, and they double clicked it and it took them to the Hall of Monuments. It's actually unfinished though in the stress test, so they went there, they even did a video of it, where you can like see what it kind of looked like in there. It was a bit buggy and a bit weird and it wasn't fully finished, but yeah, really interesting actually. Very, very cool. So that was going on. As I say, don't feel too bad if you missed out on the stress test. Really, it was only an hour long. Didn't get a chance to do much. I did, however, get a chance to film the update to the Troll's End puzzle with Magical Mike, so we can put that out. I just need to do commentary with him for it, and he's asleep right now, so I don't know when that will be coming, but I will rush that out before pre-purchase, I'm sure. Anyway, another little bit of older news that I haven't mentioned yet, actually. PC Gamer, for this week leading up to the launch, are doing kind of a Guild Wars 2 week where they look at a lot of different stuff and have a lot of different interviews and things, and exclusive content too. They've got the scoop on one of the dungeons of the game, level 40 dungeon, Twilight Arbor. So if you want to check that out, they've got that going on and up there, which is quite cool. So you do get to see that dungeon. If you don't want to spoil it for yourself, though, it's 2 days, guys. You don't have to wait too long, but that is going on there. I personally haven't watched it. I don't want to spoil it for myself, so there's that. Also, lastly, to correct myself from yesterday, why do I have to correct myself on this? How depressing is this? It's not 10 different dances. It's 5 dances. It's not every race has got a dance and then that changes from sex. It's just 5 dances. There aren't 10. In Guild Wars 1, I just expected that that's the way it was, to tell you the truth, because in Guild Wars 1, we started off with 6 professions, right? We had 6 professions, and each of those had different male and female dances. That means at the launch of Guild Wars Prophecies, ArenaNet had more dances in than they were prepared to put in for the launch of Guild Wars 2. A bit of a shame, but hey, let's not complain about everything. The dances are pretty awesome. So yeah, there's that. I should probably correct myself. Moving on to the questions. The first one's from Radio Video 441, who says, now that ArenaNet has posted an article about the Hall of Monuments, I want to hear your opinion about Kim the Historian's ghost. Why is he a ghost? We knew about the ghosts in Ascalon, Underworld, Desolation, Crystal Desert, and the reason they are as they are, but why Kim's or Kimmy's? Why was he cursed or something? But I highly doubt it. Are there any ghosts I've missed? What's the reason some people become ghosts and still walk interior? This is a question that's come up quite a bit recently in the wake of the lore video we did as well before. There's not actually always an external reason why somebody has become a spirit when they've died. Someone else was asking how necromancers fit into the equation. It's not because someone's manipulated them necessarily all the time and toyed with them. There is lore established in Guild Wars that kind of just explains why people can become undead for no real reason. And in fact, if you look at Guild Wars 1, there are a lot of situations where there are undead around, but no real reason for them to be there. There was no faux fire and none of this extra stuff going on. They were just kind of there. You look at the Shiver Peaks, particularly the southern Shiver Peaks, they had loads of undead all around. Now, I suppose you can speculate and say, oh, this is because the Vizier was still kind of pulling the strings and spawning these things for whatever reason against the Stone Summit or whatever. But really, there's no real lore to explain why these ghosts are there, and they are all over the world, really. There are just shadows and spirits and things that exist. If you look in the Guild Wars manuscripts, the Guild Wars Prophecies manuscript, right when the game first came out, the book that had a lot of lore and stuff that established various things, you can read in the description of the Hall of the Heroes a particular line that kind of explains this. So I'll just read it out. In the centre of the rift, deep inside the mists, stand the imposing walled fortress known across the multiverse as the Hall of Heroes. This structure is the pinnacle of the afterlife. When a hero dies, his spirit goes to one of 2 places. Either it is buried with the deceased body, forever trapped inside the rotting flesh and rancid bones of the corpse, or it is released into the rift. This latter honour goes only to those few whose deeds in life were legendary enough to be known across multiple worlds, and fewer still earn a place among the souls ensconced inside the hall. So this lore kind of is a little bit contradictory, actually, to what we see in game. Here it's saying that the only reason people ever, their spirits really, and their potential to become a ghost on Tyria, the only reason that might go away or they might leave is if they were legendary enough to be known across multiple worlds. Now, we know that's really not true. It doesn't pan out all the time. We've been to the mists ourselves, and we've seen the spirits of the people that are trapped there, and often they aren't people that were known across multiple worlds. Was Gwen's mother, Sarah, legendary enough to be known across multiple worlds? And no, let's not consider that the April Fool's stuff is somehow canon, and that might tie into it. Is she really? No, she's not, and tons of these spirits really aren't. So, as the game developed, they kind of established really that people it was the norm to go to the afterlife. This was the norm. You would die and you would go to the afterlife, and that was just normally what would happen to people. You even saw in Nightfall this massive river of souls, and there were just tons and tons of people, and they really kind of developed this idea. But we do have this early lore that suggests that that's not the only thing that will happen to you when you die, and I think this is still very rock solid. The idea is mostly, I think, people end up going to the afterlife, but quite often as well, their souls can be trapped inside the rotting flesh and rancid bones of the corpse, and in those situations you can have necromancers come along and summon undead out of them, or they can just end up plaguing the world and haunting people and attacking things. I think that's really what it comes down to. There are other situations where spirits can arise and things can happen, like the faux fire, like what Vizier Kilbron was doing, other reasons why the undead are attacking things or doing things, but you can't always attribute it to some external force. And in addition to that as well, if you look at the ritualists in factions, they even summoned spirits and stuff that had passed off of Tyria. They were dragging spirits right back out of the underworld into the mortal realm once again. That's kind of what they were doing. They were taking spirits from there. So there are all kinds of reasons, but it does fit in lore that there could just be undead wandering around. There could just be slightly haunted areas where there are undead about, and that's really the crux of the matter, I suppose. The next question comes from Sylvari, who says, a few weeks ago I posted a thread on Reddit essentially asking, even if Guild Wars 2 didn't have Endgame, how much would it matter? The community response was lively and thoughtful, and I'm curious about your opinion. People say that Guild Wars 2 won't have Endgame, and it's not true, but even if it were true, I wonder how significant it would be. Many people who play World of Warcraft do not raid at all, including, hilariously, many of the same people who complain about a lack of raids in other MMOs, which is the only real endgame that WoW has. and those who do raid have to wait months and months for the snail pace of new content. I would argue instead that community, as well as an access to a variety of fresh content, is really what keeps people playing MMOs. People don't pay $15 a month for 2 raids a year, they do so because they have guilds and friends and communities. What are your thoughts? Is it really all about endgame, or is community more important? To what extent is it a combination of the two? I completely agree with you, really. I'm not undermining the importance of endgame here at all, but really the deciding factor on how successful or how much longevity an MMO has comes down to the communities that are based there. That's really the bottom line. MMOs are a genre based around the idea of having these communities and having social interactions on a large scale. So if these communities don't develop, if you don't have friends and things that you identify with and have a lot of fun with in those games, then of course it's going to collapse. That's what comes first. To me, really, the success of an MMO comes on the community. You can have some horrible MMOs, abhorrent MMOs that people think are just absolutely terrible and do everything wrong, are the grindiest things in the world, and by today's standards everyone would say are just terrible and you should never get yourself into, but they have thriving and active user bases. And why is that? Even if they have these terrible mechanics that people like to complain about so much, is because they're a part of a strong community there that they identify with, and that's what the core of an MMO is. So if that's there, then sure, they're going to keep their user bases. I do definitely think that in an environment such as this, while we're waiting for a game to come out, and it is about to come out, and people are wondering how well it's going to do, too much emphasis is put on end game, and in particular this whole raiding idea, because you're right, I do think it is a minority of people that end up doing that kind of thing. People are content with a lot more than just that in the game, and especially when you look at something like Guild Wars 2 that's encouraging you to go back and roll different ults, and there's so many different options and things you can do within the content that's presented outside of the end game, then sure, yeah, it's not as important as people like to say, and yet somehow there is all this focus still put on this very minute elite member, if you will, members of the community that really will care about this kind of stuff. So my personal opinion, even if Guild Wars 2 didn't have endgame, how much would it matter? I don't think that much. The main thing about endgame, really, if the community is what's going to keep people in there, the endgame is really just serving as something for that community to do. You need to capture people for a certain length of time to build that community in the first place. If it's the kind of game that they can just complete very, very quickly in a week flat, there's not enough time to develop a really strong community that will then stick around. And that's kind of where endgame comes in. It prolongs the longevity of the game to give people time to create these ties and these things that will keep them, and these friends that will keep them going around in the game, and it keeps them having things to do. So really, I don't think one can exist without the other, really. You really need the end game to cultivate the community, but that end game itself doesn't have to be in the way of raids and stuff, and that's what I think Guild Wars 2 is trying to prove, that you don't have to kind of change the entire experience of the game into something else, this raiding experience that's different from everything you're already doing. Now it's kind of just what you enjoyed doing the entire time, extended for longer. So yeah, that's my general thoughts, maybe a bit rambly on that one. The next question's from Churley, who says, "Hey WP, after paying a Sylvari in the beta, an NPC confirms that fernhounds are also born from the pale tree. If this is the case, then doesn't that mean the pale tree could create anything she wanted? Also, doesn't it dispel this idea that Sylvari are humanoid because the pale tree's seeds were planted on the graves of Ronan's family? Perhaps I could understand if the family had a pet dog that was also killed and buried, but at the moment, I'm unaware of there being any such thing in the lore. Finally, if the fernhounds are born as pups and then later mature, why is it that the Sylvari are born at an adult age? Perhaps much of this has been answered in the past, and many people have asked the same question, but I don't seem to have found any answers." They're really good questions, actually. You raise some very good points here. Why is it that the hounds age in a normal way while the Sylvari don't seem to? There are a lot of people that kind of question this idea that the Sylvari don't age because they say, oh, well, the oldest Sylvari are only 25 years old and a 25-year-old human would look about that old, so how can we say they don't age? Well, that's not really the point, is it? Because if a human was born looking like it was 25 years old, in 25 years' time, it would look like it's 50, and presumably the same thing would happen here with the Sylvari. So it doesn't match up, and now we have the fernhounds coming from the same thing that age in the same way as everything else interior seems to age. It is interesting. I wonder whether the pale tree can create a lot of different stuff, not just these fernhounds, but maybe even more. And the Sylvari just kind of stand aside from that, and they're kind of special from that and different in that regard. We've seen the Nightmare Court have their Thorn Wolves, which just seem to kind of be these hounds but named differently or corrupted somehow, so now they are the Thorn Wolves. And we saw that there were Thorn Wolves out in the Echo-Vowed Forest too. They do look different in Guild Wars 2, but they have the same name. So what does this mean there too? Was there some kind of tree also creating those Thorn Wolves that were in the Echo-Vowed Forest? And in that case, could we look at some of the other stuff that existed in the Echo-Vowed Akavad Forest and say maybe this came from some kind of tree too. Obviously, there's the idea of the Wardens, that they're a different type of Sylvari, but what about all those other things? The brambles and the types of dragons and things we saw around in the Akavad Forest. Could we see some of those come from our Pale Tree too? They're good questions, really. I don't have much of an answer here, but I wanted to highlight the topic because they are such good questions. It really does show we don't know that much about the Pale Tree and the kinds of things it can make. Is it just choosing to make the Sylvari the way they are? Could they come out just like the Fernhounds? What's the agenda here? It is interesting. I'm hoping we'll see some more information about them because they are really cool little pets as well, and I'm sure when I play a Sylvari, if it's a ranger, that'll be its pet without a doubt. The next question is from Alistair of Darkness, who says, "Hey Mr. Potatoes, I was wondering if you know anything about the runic stones found in the wilds. One of the symbols on the stone seems to resemble a dragon. The other two look like karma symbols in Guild Wars 2 and the Golem minigame. As far as I can remember, the stones have always been there. I've always believed that the dragon symbol was a depiction of glint. However, from what we now know of Guild Wars 2, these symbols could mean something else. P.S. I don't really believe the symbols represent karma and a game board." Interesting idea. A lot of people have been talking about this recently because you go past them during the Wayfarer's Reverie quest, which does at least suggest that ArenaNet might be aware of them themselves to this day and might want us to remember that they are there. What their significance could be, though, I have no idea. How can any of us really have any idea? The question once again comes up, did they know what they meant when they originally put them down? Of course they didn't know when they originally put them down, but as I mentioned recently, I don't think there's anything wrong with retroactively going back and attributing some meaning to these things now that we have a more full, complete story. The rune with the dragon on, interestingly, the story of Glint, actually, if you guys don't really know the origins of her from a developer's standpoint, they said that really Glint was just kind of put there because they had the story of prophecies laid out, or they were writing the story of prophecies originally, and they felt like it wasn't a complete fantasy world if they didn't have some kind of dragon character there, so they put Glint in. That's kind of their reason for why Glint was there originally. And I can imagine this runic stone at the same time was something similar. It was like, okay, this is a fantasy world, we want some kind of magical prop somewhere, why don't we just put this image of a dragon around? I'm not familiar of whether these runic stones appear in many different areas of the game. If they only appear there in the wilds, that could mean that there is some more meaning to them than perhaps we are currently aware of. There were a lot of discussions I used to get into about certain props and things that had runes or whatever on them, but they'd appear in a lot of different places over the in-game world, and it was clearly just ArenaNet reusing assets, and that kind of takes the significance away from these things. But if they are just some random props that were out there in Guild Wars 1, I wouldn't be surprised to see if at some point we get some kind of answer to what they were or what they were doing. But there's so little on them, there's not much you can say at this point. What are they? One of them's a dragon. Could the other two mean something to do with the dragons? How do these three symbols relate to one another? Well, it could go any way. First, we need to find out what exactly the symbols could be representing, and even the dragon symbol as well. What kind of dragon is it talking about? Are we talking about Glint here? Or if we're talking about the Elder Dragons, which Elder Dragon? Or maybe we're even talking about some of the dragons that were out there in Cantha. Well, I mean, it's very vague at the moment, but it's cool. And like I say, this is significant, I think. If it's ever going to be significant, it'd be because ArenaNet kind of directed us so closely to it in the Wayfarer's Reverie, and so many people seem to have noticed it while going through that. So keep an eye out. I'll give any news if we do hear anything. Anyway, there you go, guys. That's the Great Guild Wars 2 countdown for today. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you tomorrow for one day remaining for us pre-purchasers. I'll see you next time.